Good morning and welcome to Sunday School. Before I begin today's lesson, I have a question. If I want to know about God, where do I look? In the Bible. The Bible tells me I can look at what God made and I can figure out there is a God. I can figure out he's big and strong, but that is all I can know. If I want to know if he loves me or what sin is or how to get to heaven, I have to look in the Bible. Well, this is the last lesson we're going to do in our Christmas sequence. And so when we started this, I said that the Christmas story doesn't start in Luke 2. It starts in Genesis. And I read a verse out of Genesis when we started this, and I'm going to read it again because it absolutely goes with today's lesson. So, Genesis 3, this is the first promise that God makes that the Messiah is coming. And I want you to listen to what God says. Cursed are you above all livestock and above all wild animals. You will crawl on your belly and eat dust all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head and you will strike his heel. Now, God had said this to Satan. It was his curse for what Satan had done in coming in and deceiving Eve. And so he told Satan, not only will you take the form of a serpent and crawl on your belly, but I'm going to put enmity. So what's enmity? We better define that. Enmity means extreme hatred, discord. So when there's enmity between two people, it's not that they dislike each other a little bit. It is extreme hatred. So there is extreme hatred between the seed of the woman, who would be the Messiah, and the seed of Satan and his offspring, between the offspring of the Messiah and the offspring of Satan. And so God had promised from the beginning that the Messiah would crush Satan's head, but there would be this enmity all along, this constant struggle and fighting between these two groups. And that absolutely is going to play into today's lesson. So up to this point in the Christmas story, we remember that not very many people knew that the Messiah had come. God had told Zachariah and Elizabeth. He had told Joseph and Mary. He had told Anna, Simeon, and a handful of shepherds. So maybe 10 people. And that is about to change in this last lesson of the Christmas story, which is actually in Matthew chapter 2. So when Simeon had blessed Jesus in last week's lesson, he had given a prophecy over Jesus that had probably made Mary and Joseph a little bit uncomfortable because it had not been a pretty sounding prophecy. Here is the prophecy. I'm going to read it out of Luke 2 so that we also have this in our minds as we're reading today's lesson. Simeon had said, "This child is destined to cause the falling and rising of many in Israel, to be a sign that will be spoken against, and the thoughts of many hearts will be revealed, and a sword will pierce your own soul too." So let's see how this Genesis account and how this account in Luke 2 of what Simeon had said to Mary and Joseph plays out in today's lesson in Matthew chapter 2, starting in verse 1. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem, in the days of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." But when Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. So he called together the people's chief priests and the scribes. And the teachers of the law. And he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. And Bethlehem in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel. Now then, Herod called the Magi secretly. And asked them the exact time that the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go, make a careful search for the child. And as soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go worship him. And after they heard the king, they went on their way. The star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they came and bowed down and worshiped him. They opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold and of incense and of myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. When they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, get up, take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt and stay there until I tell you. For Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. So he got up and took the child and his mother in the night and left for Egypt. And there he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son. When Herod realized he'd been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious. He gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and younger, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. And then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted, for they are no more. Now, after Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, get up, take the child and his mother and go back to the land of Israel. For those who were trying to take the child's life are dead. So he got up and took the child and his mother and went back to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning in Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And being warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee and went and lived in a town called Nazareth, so that it was fulfilled what was spoken through the prophets, he will be called a Nazarene. Now, we need to go back through today's lesson and make sure we understand it, because for most people, we don't know very much about King Herod. All we know is that this story, that he tried to kill a bunch of boys around Bethlehem at Christmas time. But that is not all there is to King Herod. And so we need to have a little bit of a history lesson so that we make sure we understand today's Bible lesson. So King Herod was king of Judea. He was put into his position of power by the Romans. So he worked for Rome. He became king in 37 BC, and he ruled until his death in 4 BC. Now, Herod was a fantastic builder. He spent most of his reign going through the land of Jerusalem and Judea and the surrounding areas, building and building. He rebuilt the huge sections of the temple, at least started on it. It wasn't finished in his lifetime, but he made a major changes during his reign to expand the area around the temple for the high holy days. He built an enormous palace, not just in Jerusalem. He also had a palace at Bethlehem called the Herodian. He had another palace a few miles further south than that called Masada, and he had other fortresses he built as well. He was constantly building during his reign. And so we might remember him as being a builder, but we also need to remember him for some other things that he was famous for during his reign. Now, King Herod was not a Jew. He was an Idumean, a descendant of Edom. And so he feared that his kingdom would be taken from him. And that's why he had built these fortresses to lead from Jerusalem back to where he was from in Idumea. But also, he was terribly paranoid, even maybe the Romans would take his power. And so anytime he felt threatened that someone would take his power, people died. Herod killed his wife, 3 of his sons, his in-laws, uncles, aunts, anyone who he thought might be trying to interfere with his power. And so it was so, I think there was a saying, it was better to be Herod's pig than his son, because he wouldn't kill his pigs, but he sure killed his own children. And so knowing that backstory should give us a little bit of insight into Herod's reaction when these magi or wise men arrive from out of nowhere and announce, "Where is the newborn king of the Jews?" Because who was the king of the Jews to himself? King Herod. And so having these people arrive claiming there is a new king was a threat. We are not told how many magi there were. We're not told where they're from exactly, other than from the east. We're not told their names, but all we know is that they come following a star, and they know the Messiah has arrived, and they're ready to worship him. And all Jerusalem is disturbed when Herod gets the news, because the people of Jerusalem have watched Herod. Like I said, he was infamous for being ruthless anytime his power was threatened. And so everybody in Jerusalem understood when these men arrived with their mysterious request for where is he who's been born king of the Jews, that somebody's going to die because of this. Okay, King Herod's character has been shown over and over throughout his reign. And so Herod calls the chief priests, the leaders, the teachers of the law, and asks the Bible question, where is the Messiah going to be born? And they give the correct answer. They look back at the prophets and they say, well, the prophets said that he would be born in Bethlehem. And so King Herod calls back the Magi, tells them where the Messiah will be born, which is only a few miles away from Jerusalem, and makes this request. Go make a careful search for the child, come back, report to me, and I too will go worship him. And apparently the wise men believed it. They head off following the star, which must not have been quite a normal star, because it says it goes ahead of them and comes over the house where the child is. So most stars don't come and hover over houses. They stay in the sky. But this one apparently leads them to the exact house where Jesus is. And so first thing we know for sure, is that Jesus is already at least 40 days old, because we were just in Jerusalem for his dedication and Mary's purification. We also know that they've come to a house. They have not come to the place where the manger is. They're at a house in Bethlehem. So it's sometime after that dedication. And when they come and they find Mary and the child. It does not say baby, it's child. So they come in, they find the child, they present their treasures, and they worship him, and Mary allows it. So Mary understands that Jesus is the Messiah. She's a Jew. She would never allow anyone to worship anyone but God alone. But she knows her son is God alone. So they worship, and then they're warned in a dream, don't go back to Herod, because although they may not have seen through Herod's deception, God knew Herod's heart. So they leave, and then that same time, God comes to Joseph, and it sends the angel of the Lord to warn Joseph, you have got to flee. And he doesn't just say you have to flee somewhere, he tells him exactly where to go. You have to flee to Egypt. And so in the night, Joseph gets up, takes Mary and the child Jesus, and they flee just in time. Because remember, where does Herod have a huge fortress and palace? Bethlehem. It's called the Herodian, and I will attach pictures of the ruins of this fortress. It dominates the landscape around Bethlehem. It's huge. So when Herod figures out, when the Magi don't come back in a few days, that he's been tricked, he doesn't wait. He sends word, and soldiers from the Herodian come, surround Bethlehem, and kill all the boys 2 years old and younger. And not just in Bethlehem, but in the vicinity. So I have a question. Bethlehem is a tiny little town, a couple hundred people probably at this time. So Mary and Joseph have been living there since Jesus was born. Jesus is now under 2 years old. We know that for sure. Probably around 1 year old. Knowing Herod, he probably killed everyone 2 and below to make sure that he got rid of the Messiah. But maybe he's around 1 year old. So the question is, if you're living in a town of a couple hundred people and you have to get your water from the well every day and you're out working every day, how many of these children does Mary probably know? Just think about that for a minute. She probably knew almost all of them. So Simeon had warned her, this sword is going to pierce your soul too, and that is certainly fulfilled at the cross. But I think the first hint of it is right here. She's going to find out later that there were children that she knew, Jesus' age and younger and a little older, little boys that he might have even played with or had been around, that are now gone because King Herod has killed them all, fearing that his reign is going to end. He's so determined to hold on to his kingdom. So what's ironic about this is Jesus then and Mary and Joseph flee to Egypt. And so they're there, but they're not there very long. Herod dies in 4 BC. And so Jesus was probably born in 5 or 6 BC. He's not in Egypt very long before the angel comes back to Joseph again in Egypt and says, hey, those that were going to kill the child are gone. Go back to Jerusalem, to Judea. And so he packs up and goes back. So despite all of King Herod's efforts to just hold onto that kingdom, despite all the family members he killed, despite all the fortresses and palaces he built, did he keep his kingdom? No, his kingdom was over. It's nothing but a pile of ruins, right? But what about Jesus? What about Jesus's kingdom? Did Jesus hold on to his power like King Herod? Or did he release himself to be humbled, to be crucified, to pay the sins of the world? And in that, did he gain a kingdom that, according to scripture, will never end? He did. So even though it's sad that all these children, innocent children, are killed, there's an important lesson to learn from this. that we can't hold on to things forever. We die. The only thing that lasts forever is Jesus and our relationship with him that we get to keep enjoying even after our bodies die when we're in eternity. So I want you to think about that as you're thinking about this part of the story. The other thing I want you to think about is that whole idea of enmity. So God had said clear back in Genesis, there would be this hatred. Satan would be constantly warring with the Messiah and those who follow him. And this is the first major battle that we see, right? King Herod, who is Satan's man, puppet king, hates the Messiah and is out to kill him. And yet, in the end, who wins? God, the Messiah, or Satan? The answer is God. So do we have to fear when Satan looks like he's waging war, when it looks like he's winning? No, we never need to fear that because God is always the winner every time. The last lesson from this, it's very convicting to me that these men, these magi, come from the east, so desperate to find the Messiah and to worship him. And the religious leaders know exactly where to look. And the religious leaders don't go with to Bethlehem to find him. They have no interest in finding the Messiah, and they miss it. They miss the chance to meet the Messiah, to worship him as well. And so this is convicting because it's not always those who know the Bible or have heard the Bible or heard the stories who love God and follow God, is it? That is a choice every one of us has to make. And I want to be like these wise men, where I want to be running to the Messiah and worshiping him. I don't want to miss out staying in Jerusalem. And so that is another convicting lesson from this one. So it is certainly not the way that most children's Christmas stories end, but it is the way the Bible ends it. I want you to see there's a decision that has to be made about Jesus by every person. Will you approach him like Herod? Will you approach him like the religious leaders? Or will you approach him like the Magi? And so think about those things. And I look forward to seeing you next week when we are back in the book of Acts. Merry Christmas.